It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of TAXITV Live. Yeah, baby. Woohoo! Welcome to the big show, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to our special guest, a true music library pioneer, Mr. Marc Ferrari. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael, and hello to everybody out there in Taxiland. I'm really happy to be able to be here with everybody today.
Thanks for
wishing everybody the best for the holidays. Obviously, this has been a year for the ages for everybody, and obviously hoping 2021 gets us back to where we were, or a little closer to where we were.
Yeah, if it's any worse, it'll be really scary.
It's been a hell of a year for sure.
It really has been, man. It's kind of exhausting and depressing now with all these businesses shutting down again, restaurants closing. Man, I did hear about an hour ago, though, that they finally signed a financial relief bill, and checks are going to start going out next week.
Okay. Well, that's awesome news. Unfortunately, musicians are really getting hurt, with this whole issue. I have so many friends that are their bulk of their living touring, and obviously they've just been decimated this year. And there's, I'm really hoping that we get back to some of the live concert experiences in 2021. And obviously that depends on a lot of things, right? So, but unfortunately, musicians have really taken it. It's been really tough on musicians. It's tough to be a musician to begin with, making a living as either a touring musician or a composing, musician, or it's tough being a musician. So hopefully, again, 2021 sees us getting back to where we need to be.
Yeah, if you're a touring musician, it's hard to get anything from the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP loans. So basically, at best, you're going to get unemployment. But if you're a small business musician, you're screwed.
Absolutely.
Anyway, on to happier stuff. Can you move to your right about 3 inches just so I can get you a little centered? There you go. Perfect. Okay. All right. So anyway, Marc and I have been friends for, 20, 25 years now. We kind of grew up in the industry together, and he was the founder of a great music library named MasterSource, which he started around 1992, same year that I started Taxi. And what makes him a pioneer is that, to the best of my knowledge, he started the first music library that built its catalog with music primarily from independent musicians. Prior to that, the majority of music in libraries was created by legit composers who specifically composed for libraries. They would create demos, they would submit them to the music library executives, and then the executives would pick the tracks they liked best and say, okay, get some charts written for these things, and then they would bring in session players in a real studio like Ocean Way, and they would do like a week of rhythm tracks and then a week of horn and string overdubs, and it all sounded very pro, but it sounded homogenous, and I think that's why the people called it canned music, because it was factory-like and it was canned. And then all of a sudden, along comes this guy, Marc Ferrari, and I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. But first, I want to talk about the fact that we are in the presence of a true rock star. Before he got into the music library business, Marc was in 3 bands. Got to turn my page here. He was in Keel, which was like his primary band. Then Cold Sweat and Medicine Wheel back in the 80s and the early 90s. He played clubs on Sunset Strip. That had to be a blast. He toured the world. He used lots of hairspray and probably some makeup. Had the whole rock star image, which he still does, as you can see, and likely took part in some awesome backstage debauchery, which we'll leave out of this episode because I know sometimes some of the viewers have kids in the room, so we don't want the kids to hear about what happened backstage or after the show. But sorry, I didn't know you then. So give me some backstory on how you became, Marc Ferrari, guitar rock god in these bands. Where did you grow up and how'd you get into this whole thing?
Where did I grow up? Some people still think I haven't grown up yet. But I'm from Western New York, the Buffalo, Rochester, New York area. So that's where I went to high school, and made my way out to California by 1984. But I've been, music has been my passion since I was 9 years old. When I first picked up the first guitar when I was 9 years old, I was captivated. I was very high strung as a kid, very rambunctious. I remember very clearly the day that I first was introduced to the guitar, because the parents had gone over to visit some cousins, and I was running around the house being my usual mile a minute self. And my mom saw that there was a guitar in the room that my cousin had, gave me the guitar, and it just just shut me up. I was just fascinated by this thing that, I could make noise with it. And so that was my first introduction to the guitar. When I was 9 years old, and it just became my passion. By the time I was 14, I was going to concerts, and the first concert I saw in 1976 was Kiss. And from that moment on, I knew that that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be up on stage and all the lights and all the amps and, the crowd and everything. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I knew what I wanted to do at a very early age. And so that was the fuel for my fire. That was my passion for music very early on, and just staying with it and following my dreams. I moved to Boston when I was 18. I graduated high school. A lot of people don't know this, but I actually was my class salutatorian. I graduated.
Really?
I graduated second in my class with a 96.5 grade point average, and I actually earned a 4-year scholarship. In New York, they had a Regent scholarship, which I could have used to attend any state school in New York, and I put that on hold to go join a rock band in Boston and wash dishes. And so my folks weren't, they were kind of scratching their head as to, why I would want to do that, but I was following my dream. And to their credit, they allowed me to do that. They always supported me. And, I never borrowed money from them, as poor as I was and as starving and struggling as I was in those lean years. I never borrowed money from them. But so I moved out to California in early '84, and things happened pretty quickly for me once I got out here. I actually moved out here to join 3 other guys in my cover band in Boston. Our game plan was to move the whole band out to California and, get a record deal and, become stars. But as soon as I moved out here, those 3 guys moved back. They moved back about a month later. They ran out of money, and were missing their mommies and all that kind of stuff. And I was not moving back. I stuck it out, and I got introduced to Ron Keel about 2 months after I moved out to Los Angeles. And Ron Keel had already made a name for himself in Los Angeles. He had the band Steeler that was headlining clubs, and even Metallica opened up for Steeler, and big bands opened up for Steeler back in the day. But Steeler never got a deal, even though they made a record for Mike Varney's Shrapnel Records with Yngwie Malmsteen on guitar. Ron Keel Ron Keel brought Yngwie Malmsteen over from Sweden. Made arrangements for his flight, took care of his visa, put him up, the whole thing. But he didn't. Yngwie and Ron didn't last too long together, and Steeler was a revolving door of musicians. And so finally, Ron decided to just kind of reboot, kind of bury the Steeler dog and reboot his Keel. And so I actually was the first. I was the first guitar player he hired at Keel, and Keel happened pretty quickly. I got in that band in March of '84. We wound up doing our first album for Mike Varney in June of '84. And then 2 months later, we got signed to Gold Mountain Records and started the Right to Rock album with Gene Simmons in August of '84. So we actually recorded 2 albums in the space of 3 months. Pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And our album came out in 1985, January of '85, and Keel was voted Best New Band in 3 out of the 4 top rock magazines in 1985, including Rock Scene, Metal Edge, and Circus Magazine, which is like the big one. So, yeah, things happened pretty quickly for me with Keel once I'd moved out here. And so Keel was a 4-year run for me, 1984 to 88. And in 88, I actually left Keel. I started another band, which after a couple of name changes became Cold Sweat, which released an album in 1990 on MCA Records. And we did a fair amount of touring that year on that record. But unfortunately, that was kind of when musical tastes were starting to shift. The grunge movement was starting to happen. And there really was a proliferation of hair metal bands. By 1980, there was just dozens of them. And I'll be the first to admit that, you know, a lot of them started to kind of sound the same, kind of look the same. And when the grunge guys hit, it was a breath of fresh air, you know. So during the years that the grunge era was prevalent, I was a pariah. I might as well have had leprosy because nobody wanted to touch commercial hard rock guys.
So why didn't you like throw on a flannel shirt, some Doc Martens, and just change your act?
That wasn't me. You know, I'm dyed in the wool. You know, commercial hard rock. I'm a child of the '70s. You know, all the great '70s bands are what I grew up listening to and were influenced by. And it just would have been a fallacy for me to cut my hair or, you know, start wearing Doc Martens and plaid and, you know, looking droopy and sad, and, you know, it wasn't me. However, when one door closes, sometimes another one opens. So this is where we can segue into the MasterSource story. By the way, also in this era was Wayne's World. You didn't mention my.
I think I did.
My big movie appearance in the Wayne's World movie. So
yeah, and both of them. I think I mentioned it in the email promo that went out. But you're right. Yeah, how did that happen?
Well, so that happened because Keel did a video with Penelope Spheris, who was the director of Wayne's World 1. Right. We had a song on a soundtrack for one of her previous movies. The movie was called Dudes. And you might be able to rent it. John Cryer is in there. He's went on to become a pretty big TV star. But we had the lead-off single from the album, and we got to do a video with Penelope Spheris, and I stayed in touch with her. And because she was, it still is, a big rock chick. Matter of fact, she was actually she was an A&R person over at MCA for a while. But so I stayed in touch with her, and, you know, would see her out at clubs and everything. And then, you know, I read somewhere that she was going to be directing the new Wayne's World movie. And by that time, I'd already kind of dipped my toe into licensing songs to film and TV. And I originally called her up to say, hey, you know what? If you need any background music, you know, for the film, I got a ton of stuff that you could license very quickly, very easily. He said, well, I don't know about that, but I actually need a guitar player for the film. What are you doing this summer? I said, I'm doing Wayne's World. So it was a hell of an experience. Wayne's World 1, the band had a lot more prevalent participation. We were in about 5 or 6 scenes in Wayne's World 1. And it was just an amazing experience, you know, being around all that talent, you know. Dana Carvey, Mike Myers, Brian Doyle Murray, Rob Lowe. He was funny, you know. Wayne's World 1, Wayne's World 2, when they had Wayne Stock was great, man. It was like 4 or 5 days shooting out at Calamigos Ranch, and Peter Frampton was there. He was originally supposed to be in the film. I don't know why he wasn't, but hanging out with him and Aerosmith, my heroes Aerosmith, you know. And Chris Farley was hanging around the whole Wayne's World 2 set, you know, out there. It was an amazing experience.
Wow, sounds like it.
Yeah, so party on, everybody.
Hey, I want to know, why does Rob Lowe never look like he ages? That guy looks like he's aged about 6 years and about 30 years. I don't know what his secret is, but whatever he's eating or taking, I want something.
Good genetics, I guess, or, you know, good dermatologist, maybe. We don't know. You know, who knows? But he was a friendly guy, and I did many scenes with him because, you know, he was a manager in Wayne's World 1, and so he was, you know, he was in a lot of the scenes that the band was in. So yeah.
So once you started, you know, you got some stuff licensed. How did you figure out that you wanted to start a library? Did you even know what a library was when you first started licensing?
Well, I knew I was kind of I was aware of, like, movie and TV licensing, because Keel actually had a couple of songs that were licensed for film. So we had that. I had that experience with that. But I knew what music libraries were. But if we're talking about rolling back to like 1991, 1992, music libraries were much different.
Yeah.
Now they're all-encompassing animals that are producing music that is every bit as good as major label recordings. But back then, back in the early 90s, there were music libraries, but as you mentioned earlier, they were mostly cue based. They were not song based, but they were cues. If you wanted jazz music, they had libraries had stuff that was generically similar to some of the artists there. But back in the early 90s, also the quality of these recordings was not great. It was very chintzy sounding. So, the big libraries back then, Jim Long, of course, who started First Com. I got my First Com sweaty on here because MasterSource is now part of the First Com library, but Jim was one of the pioneers, and you had Sam Trust with Killer Tracks. Yeah. And you had Ole George. I don't even know what happened to his library, but I remember, like, in the early 90s, Ole George was like one of the big players, and he had a listening room in Hollywood where music supervisors or film editors could come and listen in a tape room to cues. I know it's comical now to see how far we've come from that point. But in answer to your question, I started in the early 90s. I started getting some of my songs placed in shows. I had friends of mine that were working. I had friends that were working as grips, or assistant coffee makers, on some of these films or TV shows. And back then, again, we talk about music supervisors. You hear the word music supervisor used a lot these days, but back in the early 90s, there really wasn't a lot of people who were truly music supervisors. It was a role that had yet to be developed.
Yeah, I think Maureen Crowe actually had a lot to do with kind of codifying what the role and the title of music supervisor was.
Maureen Crowe was the music supervisor on Wayne's World. Wayne's World 1.
Boy, she's energetic, isn't she? Yeah, that woman, man, she works like 23 hours a day.
Absolutely. So I started getting some songs of mine placed in B movies, where I had friends of mine that were working on the films, and, they had the ear of the director, or the director, would tell the long-haired coffee maker to go find me some rock music for this scene, right? And so that's how a couple of the early uses happened, were friends of mine that were working on these films. And they would say, you know what, we have a bar scene, in this film. The director wants me to find some rock music for it. I know you got some demos hanging around, so let me hear a couple of these things. And sure enough, they'd use my music and give me a couple $100 and screen credit, which was nice. But the more important thing is I got an idea. That was the most important thing I got out of it, was the idea. I just made a couple $100 here, and back then I was working telephone gigs like musicians used to do, to selling pencils or advertising space or whatever it was. Telephone gig. I was making $200 or $500 a week, whatever it was, just to kind of get by. And here I made the same amount of money, just allowing somebody to use a piece of my music that already existed, So then I thought, well, if I did this once, maybe I could do it again. Maybe there's another film that needs another piece of rock music. And it started out, I was the rock guy, I was the guy to come for rock music, And then I started getting requests for country or Latin or dance or R&B or rap or anything else that was. And I was like, you know what, let me get back to you. I'll get back to you.
You're getting out of frame a little bit. Can you move? There you go. Perfect. Stay right there.
It's funny because I look in frame where I am, but
right. I know.
So it started out as licensing rock stuff that I had, my own demos, right? But then when I got asked for a piece of country music, it was like, I don't have any country demos right now. Let me circle back to you. Let me get back to you, right? So that's where MasterSource, it wasn't even called MasterSource back then. MasterSource was a few years later that I, decided on that name, MasterSource. But then it was trying to find quickly material that could be easily licensed. And that's when I started going out to friends. I had friends of mine that played in country bands, and Ron Keel actually, he segued into becoming Ronnie Lee Keel in the early 90s, and he had a couple of country bands. And so, I was licensing, his music early on. So then it became, as I mentioned, people asking me for different types of music, and I never wanted to say no. I never wanted to say no to somebody who's like, let me get back to you. Okay, so let's also roll the clock back to the early 90s. The problem with licensing popular music back then is that it was slow and it was expensive. Okay, back in the early 90s, if you were a filmmaker and you wanted a piece of music for your film, let's say you had to have the latest AC/DC song, or Van Halen song, or whoever it was, it was going to take it was going to take a long time to get the rights cleared for both the publishing and the master, and it was going to cost you a fortune. Okay, so sometimes the movies have that luxury. They have the luxury of time and they have the luxury of budget. But on TV, they don't have that same luxury of time, and they don't have that same luxury of budget for the most part. And so when I came along, I was able to create some music for these clients that was generically similar to the artist they were trying to license. I never ripped anybody off. I never ripped off a Van Halen song. I never ripped off a Garth Brooks song. I never ripped off a Madonna song. But I created music that was in the same ballpark. It was generically similar to these artists. All right. And so I also benefited from kind of being at the right place at the right time, because the early 90s was also when we started to see TV shows use music a lot more. The early spelling shows like Party of Five, 90210, Beverly Hills 90210, Party of Five, Melrose Place, they started using music weekly because these characters were listening to music, right?
Right, and they put so much in the show that they couldn't afford the big ticket music.
Exactly. They might have been able to afford one piece of big music. They blow their budget on one piece of music and then have all these other spots they needed to fill. And they needed to film them quickly because TV, it's weekly. They film weekly, they edit weekly, they air weekly during the season.
Yeah.
So, again, my idea was, you know what? You're not going to get that Garth Brooks song in weeks. But you know what? I'll create something for you that's generically similar to Garth Brooks. It's going to be playing in the background for the most part anyways. Somebody's going to be talking over it. It doesn't matter if it's Garth Brooks, but if it has the feel of the artist that you're going after, that's, I've done my job. So that was the idea that I hit on, that I could create music that was generically similar to these artists, and I could license it at a moment's notice to these people, and for a decimal point or two less than what they were paying for. That was the concept that became MasterSource, and my concept was off like a rocket. So for a while there, I was the guy in all these studios, Paramount TV and Sony Television, Warner Television, and all the TV production companies and movie companies would come to for music that was, they wanted to be pop music, but they couldn't get the stuff they wanted. So,
and something else important was happening at the time, which was home studios started to proliferate. They were, very archaic compared to today's standard, but people were doing stuff on 8 tracks of Alesis ADAT, the first real digital machine you could pick up for home for $2,500 or whatever it cost. So more people that were capable of playing it could now produce it without going into Ocean Way or one of the big studios.
Exactly. And it's funny, you hit on another little subject. It's just the way in which music was presented and consumed. I actually started really before internet delivery of music. When I started, I feel like a fossil talking about this now, you know.
That's all right. I think we're similarly aged fossils. I get it.
It actually predated CDs. When I started,
Wow.
I started sending stuff on cassette tapes, and then it was ADATs, you know, because
Yeah.
most of the editors had ADAT machines. And for those
Oh,
of
you
you,
mean a regular DAT machine?
yeah,
The
regular
digital cassette, right?
yeah. Um, and then like CDs started popping up around, I don't know, like 93, 94. And I remember that I had to go. I had a buddy of mine that taught at Musicians Institute. They had a standalone CD burner. Back then, those burners were very expensive, at $2,000-3,000. And the blank CDs were $8 a piece. I mean, now they're like 10 cents a piece or whatever. But back then, the blanks were $8 a piece, and you had to, you had to do your recording. Then you had to finalize it. If you didn't do it right, you messed up the CD. I remember like literally going to MI at night and burning these CDs. I was like the first guy to have music library stuff on CDs. I was so excited, you know. And then I bought my own CD burner. And then a couple of years later, you started seeing them on computers, you know. So MasterSource actually predated CDs, and then kind of went through the whole, you know, I made box sets of CDs for many, many years, probably 10 years, 12 years. And then it shifted out of CDs into digital delivery. You know, who wants to have 1,000 CDs on their wall when they can have a hard drive, or now digital delivery, you know?
Yeah.
So there's been obviously just a lot of changes from when I started to where we are now. But in essence, that's how MasterSource started. It was kind of semi-accidental, where I started getting stuff placed on my own, demos that I had, and then, getting asked for other styles of music that I didn't write well. And as you mentioned, a big part of my success was finding great composers, great guys that could write, in the genres that I needed them to write with. And I found a lot of them through Taxi, as you know, that, we can name some names if you want, but
yeah, throw some out there. I know the first one is going to be Matt Hirt.
Matt Hirt is old with me after all these years, and I know that you've used Matt on some of your print advertising, but he is the poster boy.
Yep.
He's the poster, and he's just one of those guys that can. He's gifted in that he's brilliant. He can write big band stuff, chart stuff. He can write rap stuff. He can write pop stuff. He can write dance stuff. He can write, electronica. He's one of those guys that's gifted, and he's great at all of it, but he's a rarity.
It's because he's smart enough to really study the genre and analyze what makes it work before he attempts to write it.
Yeah. So kudos to that. I know there's some other folks. Most recently, I came to you about a year and a half ago for the contemporary Christian project that I was asked to do for FirstCom.
Right.
And I believe we found a few folks through you. So
yeah, we solved that problem with one phone call.
Yeah. So yeah, the other thing I think really made MasterSource, I was providing a service that was desperately needed by the studios, and but the other thing that you hit on earlier is that I wanted to make sure the production quality was major label quality. We had to move the bar up from where production music was in the late '80s, early '90s to the new millennium. Because again, people were asking me to find something instead of Puff Daddy or Garth Brooks or Madonna or whatever, and those they all have great production value. So I had to find guys that both wrote well and produced well. So that's there's some great writers out there that maybe our production skills could use a little work, and there's some great producers out there that are not great writers. So finding those folks out there that have both of those skill sets is that's what made I really believe made MasterSource stand out from the other libraries. So I was using real musicians, guys that could have gotten record deals. Matter of fact, a lot of writers that I did employ had major label deals at some point. How
was it when you reached out to these musicians? Because I remember a time when
oh, would you like your song placed in a movie or a TV show? Before people got comfortable with it, they were uncomfortable with it, and they thought they were like selling out,
Yeah.
or that other musicians would make fun of them. How did you get them on board with the whole idea?
Well, as soon as some of them started seeing some of their royalties, they came around pretty quick. Yeah, because let's be honest here, that the royalties that can be made when a song plays on a network television show can be very healthy. Now, unfortunately, they've come down a little bit. Like when I started with MasterSource in the early '90s, if you had a song that had a vocal in it and played on network TV prime time for 45 seconds or more, that's considered a full feature performance at 45 seconds. You were making $1,500, $1,200, $1,500, and
just on the performance royalties.
Just on the performance side, yeah.
Do me a favor. Wherever you're looking right now, you must be wearing AirPods, I'm guessing.
I am.
Because every time you look to your right, and every time you look right at me, like right there, we hear you loud and clear. So do your best.
I'll look right at you.
All right, thanks.
Certainly those performance royalties were very healthy. As I mentioned, back in the '90s, they weighted them a lot more. ASCAP in particular weighted pop music a lot more. So those rates have come down a little bit since then. But if you had one of your songs on one TV show, and back then sometimes those shows ran 2 or 3 times in a season and repeat, you were making some pretty decent money for one placement of your song.
Yeah.
You multiply that by some of my guys were making 6 figures a year in their performance income, after a while. There's nothing to sneeze about.
Yeah.
So any misconception about, production music libraries being anything subpar, quickly evaporated with that, So.
Something funny that you'll appreciate that's always made me laugh, but it's kind of an insider thing, is many, many times when I've been doing panels of A&R people from major labels at the Taxi's convention, the Road Rally, if they're doing a listening panel and they hear a song that's like, it's not bad, but it's not great. It's not going to get cut by a major label artist. It's not going to get them a record deal. The A&R guys would always go, that's really good for film and TV, because they didn't know what else to say. And a lot of times they weren't good for film and TV because the lyrics were too detailed or told their own story that would conflict with a script, or had a screaming sax solo going halfway through the song. But their default response to music that they couldn't say, well, the chorus isn't big enough or the lyric doesn't make any sense, they'd go, that'd be really good for film and TV.
Oh, it's kind of like telling a baseball player you'd be really good in the minors. I mean, it's maybe something similar. But again, the production music royalties were really nice back then. They're still okay now. It really is more of a numbers game now to have more cues out there. Back then, the home run was having a song with a vocal on network TV during prime time that aired for more than 45 seconds. It was all those slots had to align in order for you to get that big home run money. But it happened quite a lot with MasterSource. All I can tell you is that my writers are very happy. And by the way, a lot of that stuff is now in syndication. So stuff that was placed in the early '90s, they're still playing on syndication. So something that to work you did 25 years ago, and you played 25 years ago, is still earning you money today, and it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. So how long did you own the library? Because at some point, didn't Universal buy half of it at some point, and then eventually they bought out the other half and you stayed on managing it? Or how did that deal go down?
I sold MasterSource in its entirety to Universal in 2007. And then I stayed 5 years with them to run the business that I sold them.
Right, great.
So I guess I had about a 15-year run with MasterSource before I sold, and then another 5 after.
Sweet.
Yeah, and just so your viewers know, I'm actually still involved with MasterSource, even though I don't own it, and I'm no longer employed by Universal Music Group. MasterSource is now part of the First Com family of libraries, and I still produce all the music, all the new content for them. So it averages about 10 titles a year. Okay. So for the last 9 years, I stepped down as a full-time employee in 2012. So I'm going on 9 years. I've still been producing all the new content that they add to the MasterSource library. So I still have my foot in the water, toe in the water with my old gang. And I'm still employing my core group of guys, including Matt. Matt's been with me this whole run,
Yeah.
And again, we found some other folks through Taxi, and hopefully we can continue to employ some Taxi folks from time to time.
Yeah, I think it's time for you to run some new listings. The level of talent at Taxi in the last few years has gotten so remarkably good that people that are regular panelists at the Road Rally always call me like the day after the rally and say, dude, your people are amazing. And I think it's because we've been educating them for so long. There are a lot of talented people out there, but you have to harness that talent for a specific kind of goal, for the library world. It's not the same as making records. It's a little different. And our members have picked up on that and listened and perfected their shtick. And man, oh man, it's amazing how many Taxi members get signed and get placements now. It's grown so much over the last 3 years that even we can't believe it. How do you think that the library industry in general as a whole has changed in the last 10 years, let's say?
Well, I can tell you that there's, from a production standpoint, there's certainly been a lot of additions. When I did MasterSource, I only required a full vocal mix and a full non-vocal mix. And then I would edit down the non-vocal mixes to 60s, 30s, and 15s, which is kind of, what my clients wanted at that time. But now, I'm required to turn in, multi-mixes and stems and they really want they want the start points and the end points to be specific, and the stems have to be spot on. They have to be edited in a certain way. So there's I've noticed that. I've noticed that the requirements have certainly changed. And let's face it, there's just more of everything. There's so much more competition out there. Whereas in the early 90s, MasterSource had very little competition for what I was doing. Maybe a couple of other libraries, Heavy Hitters was out there. They came out a year or two after me. And there was a few others that had vocals. But, now all the libraries have vocal series. Most of the libraries will have a producer series, or, they'll have George Martin will have a series, or Puff Daddy, or you see all these big guys that are now doing their own series for libraries. So it's become a lot more competitive.
Yeah.
There's so many libraries out there, but there's only a finite amount of opportunities to place music in TV shows and film. But it grows every year, and again, I keep rolling back to when I started all those years ago. You didn't even have the Fox network or Warner, the WB network. It was the 3 major networks and some of the cable operators. Now everybody produces content, HBO, ESPN, Amazon, Netflix. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. There's more programming now than ever.
Right.
But with that, again, you have more people that are playing in the sandbox than ever. More music libraries, more composers with their own libraries, some music supervisors with their own libraries,
Yeah, what do you think about that? I'm well aware of those. And it's kind of like Nashville back in the 70s and 80s. very incestuous, I guess is the nicest way to say it, you know, where certain producers would make sure that writers they had signed to publishing agreements were getting their songs on the records. Well, now you've got music soups that are using music from their own libraries. How come nobody's calling BS on that?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I don't know if it's a conflict of interest, because it's a music supervisor's job, I guess, to satisfy the producers of the film or the directors of the film. If they can do it internally, I guess they're doing their job, but they may be colored, you know, they may be they may have blinders on, you know, or maybe the better piece of music is outside their library.
Right.
So it does raise some ethical questions or concerns. So, look, I understand why a music supervisor would want to draw from their own library. They're getting a bite out of the same apple. But again, it does raise some ethical issues as to whether or not the client is really being best served. But
yeah,
that's for another panel to discuss.
Yeah, I guess you're right that if the bottom line is the showrunner or the whoever is the final judge of the music is happy with what the music soup is putting in front of them, I guess they don't really care where it came from, but they would have to doubt if there's something better out there. But
they may have been happier with something else, but this we'll never know. You know?
Right. How do you feel? I'm jumping a little bit ahead on my list of questions here, but how do you feel? You know what? No, I'm not going to jump there yet. I'm going to go to something else, which is sometimes new taxi members who are inexperienced in the ways of the music library industry will get a forward from Taxi, and then the library reaches out to them and says, I'd love to sign you. And it's a 50-50 deal. The library gets the publisher's share, the writer keeps the writer's share. Everybody, that's standard nowadays. Everybody should be happy. But some early or less experienced Taxi members will say, I'm not giving up any of my publishing. I remember taking a music law class in college 15 years ago, and they said, never give up your publishing. How would you counter that argument to inform the uneducated, uninitiated that that's the way things work and why it happens that way?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's remember that we are in the music business, and the word business is associated with that, and that in terms of production music library, most agreements are done as a work for hire. Okay, so your readers should educate themselves about what work for hire agreements are. But essentially, if you boil it down, typically a work for hire agreement is when the author of the work is under strict interpretation of copyright law, the person hiring the composer can list themselves as the author. But most music libraries don't do that. Under strict interpretation of copyright law, that's what work for hire is. I would say to those writers getting into this field for the first time that you have to look at this as commerce, number one, okay? And it's really no different than a painting. If you were a painter and you painted a painting and you put it in a gallery and somebody bought your painting, they are buying that painting. You as the artist no longer own that painting. I guess you could you could do prints and stuff and license it out. But if you had a one-off painting and you put it in a gallery and somebody bought it, you've transferred that ownership to the acquirer. And that's the interpretation of work for hire agreements.
Yeah, you're breaking up again. I don't know what.
So what do I need to do?
I don't know what to tell you. It's like sometimes you're fine, and then you move your head an inch, and you're not fine anymore. But
so where it looks good, because I'm off to the right.
Right there is kind of good at the moment. I hope it stays that way. Thanks, Mark.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of a generalization of work for hire agreements, is that someone is hiring you to perform a service. and you are assigning over the rights to that work to the person that's hiring you. Typically with music libraries, as you mentioned, the writer, the composer, keeps his writer's share of performance income. In other words, once that song is aired on TV, the publisher is going to earn $1 and the writer is going to earn $1. It's an equal amount of royalties. And the other thing I would say to those folks trying to break into it is that, as in most fields, it's very, very competitive. And unfortunately, you have some folks that will go even beyond giving away their music for free. But I've heard of situations where even writers will kick back some of their performance income to libraries, or it's very sad. There's some companies out there, and I'll name them. Saban and Deep were both. I think they were very high-profile lawsuits brought about by their writers because they were hired under work for hire agreements, and the writers all of a sudden seem to think that they take those agreements and kind of rewrite history. But they did sign work for hire agreements, and I believe both Deke and Saban prevailed in those lawsuits.
Wow.
Yeah, so new writers have to understand that they're competing against a lot of other folks in I say the sandbox. Everybody playing in the sandbox. So there's a lot of competition out there, and you have to understand that in this field, the typical work for hire agreement is that a writer gets paid for his work. Most libraries will pay you. They should be paying you to sign over the composition and the master recording to them, and you in your writer's share of your performance.
But many libraries don't, especially libraries that deal almost exclusively in instrumental music. They don't pay for those cues. That's become the norm now. But you could make a pretty good argument that people make it up in bulk on the performance royalties, getting stuff in reality shows. So what percentage of libraries would you say that are dealing in stuff with lyrics, actual songs with lyrics, are still paying any sort of upfront money to buy out the publisher's share of the copyright?
Well, from what I know, I hear from some of my writers who write for other libraries, at least big libraries, the ones that are attached to, big publishing companies, the Universal libraries, the Warner Chappell libraries, are still paying writers, a production fee. I do, that's what I'm told. And again, I don't have my finger on the pulse of every music library out there, but from what I'm gathering, at least the bigger ones, the ones that are, as I mentioned, part of the bigger publishing companies are paying production fees.
I would counter that by saying that a lot of libraries that work with Taxi are in fact distributed by Universal, and they don't pay production fees. However,
there's a difference.
Okay, go ahead.
By Universal and being owned by Universal, because so the big Universal libraries are Killer Tracks, First Com, and MasterSource. Those are the big three. So
right.
I can only speak for what I know.
But
they
frankly,
should be. For a music library to expect a writer producer to produce this on their own and then sign over the publishing system, that's pretty onerous. I think that's a big ask. I think.
I would. There are libraries that we work with at Taxi that don't pay anything, don't pay a production fee, and get the publisher's share, but they're so good at what they do and have made so much money for our members. And I know them to be very ethical, extremely hardworking people that I'm like, that's okay. But there are others that are not. A lot of little libraries, 1 million, well, I'm exaggerating that number, but, a couple thousand libraries, I would venture a guess, have cropped up over the last 5 years that are started by people that go, oh, there's money to be made in the library business, so I'm going to jump in.
And they've lowered the floor on all that stuff, so to speak. And usually when there's any kind of economic downturn like we're going through right now, those companies tend to go away and the better ones tend to stick around. There's another issue that I've been dying to ask you about. I would have asked you this on a personal phone call, but I might as well ask it in front of a bunch of people, which is, now with all the different companies, I don't want to pick on CD Baby because they're a fine company, they're totally legit, but they're a good example of this. All the distribution companies and companies that provide services for musicians, and many of them have a little box that you check that says, would you also like us to monetize your music by collecting royalties for placements for you? You know, maybe they're acting as an admin company only. Maybe you've signed a non-exclusive publishing deal with them by checking that box. In some cases, you've signed an exclusive deal by checking that box. We are starting to see this become a real problem when we forward taxi members to some of our library clients, and the libraries do their due diligence and they get down far enough down the road where they reach out to the musician and say, I'd like to offer you a deal. And then they find out, oh, lo and behold, they actually checked that box and they are now signed to a publishing agreement that they signed 3 or 4 years ago that they didn't even realize was a publishing agreement, or if they did, they've forgotten about it. Are you seeing any of that in your world or not yet?
Not yet. Not for me personally, but I think it also harkens back to
shit, I'm losing. I mean, shoot, I'm losing you again.
Yeah.
You're perfect right there.
Okay, I think that harkens back to some sage advice that I gave in my book, Rockstar 101. By the way, shameless plug. Shameless plug. That book's been out almost 20 years, but I cover a lot of music publishing stuff in there.
Yeah, Rockstar 101. I've read it. Actually, my copy's at the office, or I'd be holding it up right now. But Liz does have the link, and she's going to put it in the chat room.
Yeah, I think it's probably available on Amazon.com. But anyways, nobody should sign anything or click anything until they've either thoroughly read it through and understand it, or get somebody else to understand it for you. That's the biggest piece of advice that I can give to, not only recording artists, but composers is please understand what you're signing. It's easy to get into a bad deal. It's harder to get out of one, and it's been said it's better to have no record deal than being in a lousy one, because a record deal a bad record deal can tie you up for 7 years here in California,
Yeah.
And so I really would encourage everyone to just take that step back and don't click that button yet. Just make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into. Because hearing a story like that, where someone clicked something they thought that maybe CD Baby or somebody like them was going to just represent them non-exclusively, and they'd have the opportunity to pitch their stuff somewhere else or to write for other libraries, and then finding out that you're in this bear trap of an agreement that you have to, gnaw your leg to get out of. It's horrible, and I hate hearing that, because musicians, again, it's tough enough to make a living in any music field, Yeah, you read about, the Kanye West and a few others that are make hundreds of millions a year, but, that's the top of the pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid's a lot bigger. There's so many more people at the bottom not making $100 million a year than are at the top making $100 million. So it really is. It's challenging to make a living as a musician. It's always been,
Yeah.
I going back to the minstrel days, being, or through the 1800s and even through early contemporary music, yes, you hear about successful people, but there's for every successful guy that's making a decent living, there's thousands more that are struggling to make a living. So hearing stories like this is discerning to me. And but again, I would encourage your viewers to, again, to just hit the pause button before you hit the click button, and understand what you're getting yourself in.
Sorry, I'm turning off my phone. It's vibrating.
Yeah.
I think that it's sad for all forms of creative people that I've noticed, whether they're visual artists, recording artists. People are just so hungry and desperate to get their work out there and be recognized and appreciated, that the minute somebody pays attention to them, it's like being somebody who doesn't get asked on a lot of dates, or somebody who doesn't get a lot of yeses when they ask other people out on dates. And somebody who's like above your pay grade says yes, you're like, I'm all over it, but you don't realize that they're a psychotic serial killer. Or that's why people sign bad deals, and they look at the stuff and they go, this is gibberish. Do I want to spend $500 an hour on a music attorney when this deal, this particular instrumental cue probably won't generate $500 over the next year for me? But Matt Hirt, our mutual friend, a longtime Taxi member and a longtime writer for you, has always said, hire a music attorney to go through the first contract you get and explain what all these clauses are, take copious notes, and then that way the next contract will have many of the same things in there, so you don't have to pay an attorney to go through the whole thing. Most of it you'll understand, and you can hit the attorney with the one clause you don't understand. And I think that was maybe Matt Hirt's greatest gift to his fellow members, was explaining that. And what a generous guy to share that with everybody.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great idea. There might be some free, I don't know if free is the right word, but there might be some stuff out there. Google has, I think if you deep Google, you could probably find some commentary on music contract law out there. But I think every dollar spent on an attorney comes back in time, multiple times.
Any sage? Oh, I want to ask you about universal lyrics. You and I've never had this discussion for as long as we've known each other. There are a lot of things, we've gone to lunches and stuff. We've never discussed universal lyrics. It's hard to get people to understand when they write a song and they're emoting and the muse has come to visit, and they write a song about their breakup with their boyfriend or their girlfriend, their life story, and there are a lot of personal details, a lot of details, period, in there. Makes it very difficult to sync because it may take it out of what the film or the scene is about. It may conflict with the story and the scene. But I have noticed to some small degree in the last year and a half to 2 years that we're getting less pressure from the libraries and to some extent supervisors. Universal lyrics aren't that important to me. It's going to be used as background source. I'm more concerned about the sound, the overall vibe. Does it sound like the band Keel would have sounded back in that time period? Do you have an observation about universal lyrics? Are they any less important? Are they still important? What's your feeling?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. In some cases, a specific lyric might work. Now, there have been times where, back in the day, where a supervisor we would custom create pieces of music for people, and sometimes it was the lyric that was important. Sometimes it was the feel of the song that was important. They wanted, for example, they wanted a piece of rap music with a sitar in it. They wanted that mashup. Nobody could find it, so we had to create it. So sometimes the specific lyric is what the doctor ordered. But I think in more general terms, it's a general lyric, as you were calling a universal lyric. I thought you meant universal music group lyric. I'm like, I never heard that. Is there a Warner Brothers lyric? No. But I think in general for music libraries, because again, we're talking generalities here, and in general, music libraries are filling a need to kind of fill in the holes, fill in the gaps. Most movies, they'll have their centerpiece songs, they'll have their big, huge songs, they'll have their end title song, they'll have their maybe big love scene song. but the music libraries, fill the holes. They fill in the source music gaps. People walk into a restaurant, a bar, there's music playing, or there's a car radio scene where they're flipping through or a headphone scene or a blaster scene.
Yeah.
It's the '80s movie, and there's still blasters. That's where the music libraries are, in film and TV specifically, are filling a lot of those gaps, and therefore, I don't think a specific lyric about a specific breakup or a specific time and place is necessary. It's generalities, and for the most part, music and source music is not featured that predominantly. In general, our source music placements are background. There are car radios, there are bar scenes, there's dialogue over it. They're shorter in length in general, and so I think people are, for the most part, safe in creating generalized lyrics or universal lyrics, as you're saying, unless there's a specific ask for a specific lyric. Maybe there's a character that's going to Paris on a honeymoon, and so all of a sudden, something that refers to Paris or refers to France or Europe or traveling or vacation or honeymoon or starting off a new life, would become more important. But again, those are specifics and not generalities.
Right. And from a library owner's perspective, that's great. If you've got a song that talks about the moonlight on the Seine in Paris, that's great for that, once every 3 years when you get that ask. For the rest of the time, if somebody's having a romantic moment, on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, you can't use it.
It's funny you mentioned that, though, because there's a series that I've been producing for MasterSource. They're branding it as Girls on Top. So it's on top of the pop charts. Okay, but it's a series. I've done 5 of these already, and the concept is that it's female empowered pop and rock songs. So,
right.
And lyrically, it's about female empowerment. Not being subjugated or whatever. It's like I'm my own boss. I'm the boss chick, whatever. So there's an example that my writers do. I've given them a direction to go on. We don't want you singing about stabbing your boyfriend to death or that kind of thing. We want lyrics about female empowerment. About
right.
Feeling good in feeling good in your space and feeling good in the world. So that's an assignment in which the lyric is semi-important. But that's the only one I can really think of the last few years that has had any kind of specific lyric direction attached to it.
Yeah, we get a ton of requests for female empowerment stuff. And generally, the clients are looking for going out with the girls. We're going to light up this town. It's like we're strong. We're a force of nature kind of stuff. Not I am woman, hear me roar so much. Helen Reddy was way ahead of the curve on that. I think I've asked everything on my list. I want to open this up, which is perfect timing because I was going to try and squeeze in a half an hour of questions from the viewers today. So if you guys in the audience have some questions, I will read them from the chat because Mark's not seeing the chat, and I will relay them to him. Somebody wrote in, my girlfriend, but this didn't show up in the chat. It got deleted. My girlfriend kicked my ass. All right, here's a question from Paul House. Mark, thanks for being here. Do you find that running the library keeps you tied up in paperwork with less time to make music? How do you feel about that? Do you still write?
Okay, so yes, yes, absolutely. Frank Zappa said it best. There's more business than music in the music business. That's a quote attributed to him. And running a music library unfortunately, has a lot of administrative components to it. From issuing contracts to the songs that you're creating to copyright registration to royalty accounting to reviewing royalty statements to maintaining websites and all the data points that go into matching metadata to music. So yes, unfortunately, the administrative component of running a library takes up so much of my time. A lot of people may surprise. I didn't write for my own library for many years because of that reason. And I felt my value to growing my business was more important for me getting out there and meeting clients, taking meetings, meeting the music supervisors, the directors, the studio heads, getting out there and establishing a relationship with someone than being in the studio, spending a whole day writing or composing a song. And that's why for many years I didn't have the time to write for my own library. Now these days, where I've sold my business to Universal, and my only responsibility to them now is producing new music. Yes, I'm able to write more now, and actually played on a couple demos last year. I hadn't done that in a long time. So,
wow.
Yeah, I know I'm a little rusty these days.
Is guitar still your primary instrument?
It's my only instrument. I haven't even mastered that after 50 years of playing it.
I'm just curious from a recording perspective, being a retired engineer. Do you use amps and microphones? Do you use Sims? How do you get your sounds?
Yeah, well, these days, we've obviously seen a segue from physical amps to all the digital audio workspaces that are out there. So that's how I roll these days. But the old days, you were setting up an amp in a studio and blasting away with Marshall amps. I miss feeling the push of that air through the amps. But obviously these days with digital workspaces, it just makes it so much easier, and you're able to collaborate obviously with people all over the world. And that's getting back to our friend Matt Hirt. He's the master of that.
Yeah.
He'll bring in co-producers from all over the world. We've done Asian rap titles. We've done world rap titles where he's gotten guys from Russia, Korea, Spain, Italy, France, Germany. The guys that live in these countries to actually perform on his recordings.
That's become very common with our members. And once again, Matt was the catalyst that kind of got the ball rolling and popularized that. I have a question here from Super Blonde, one of the people in the chat, saying, what's the harmonic complexity of placed songs? Only 4 chords, or does more complex stuff tend to be favored by the people who are making the decision?
I don't know if there's any right or wrong answer there. I mean, AC/DC's only got 3 chords in it, and you hear them everywhere. But I think in general, what makes music interesting is when there's lifts and when there's changes in the music. So I would think in general that you're probably more things are being licensed that have more than 4 chords in them. But I haven't really paid attention to that. Again, there's probably some forms of music, blues, the standard 12-bar blues stuff is probably 3 chords, right? So that gets, blues gets licensed quite a bit. But I think in general, I think we're safe to say that we're hearing songs that have more than 4 chords in them. Interesting question.
Simplicity is something I keep hearing this over and over from Taxi members who have catalogs or have stuff in several other people's catalogs that, and I think Matt Hirt may have actually told me this. I hate to keep referencing Matt, but hey, he's a great guy, so let's reference the hell out of him. That often the alt mix of something, let's say they've done something that's fairly complex, and the person licensed or the library will say, can you give me an alt mix or give me stems? And it's almost always the simpler stuff that tends to get licensed more frequently. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it, distracts less from the scene. But that is definitely a thing that I've heard about. Now, that's not the same as the number of chords or the harmonic complexity, but somebody once explained it to me. One of my library owner friends said to me, if the music is so good that people notice it, more often than not, that's a bad thing because they want to keep you on task listening to the dialogue and the actors. If the music's so good, you're paying attention to the music, that's a bad thing. Obviously, for a piece of music that's featured in a scene, it becomes less of a thing. It's better to have music that's more impressive, let's say. Have you noticed anything about the simplicity factor?
Well, I think you hit on the whole issue of stems. So stems allow the editors to really be a musical director. Let's say there was a saxophone going all the way through the song or most of the song, or guitar fills or vocal accents going through a song. By having these stems, the editors can mix. They can mix the instrument up or down, in terms of volume or out. They can choose, how many instruments to have, and I think it just gives them more control than ever before. Because again, back in the day, I only provided one mix, or
right.
One mix with the vocal, one mix without the vocal. If you didn't like the saxophone, then find a spot that the saxophone didn't happen. But these days, because the editors now have more tools. I hear some libraries are mixing in 5.1 stereo, and we're making those mixes available. There's more options out there for the editors to, kind of chart the course of how the song lays in a scene. That's been my observation.
I'm looking for other questions here. In the world, Paul House asks another question. In the world of COVID, are you placing via video chats? How's the network being done now? But you're not actually doing the placing, right? You're building the catalog.
Yeah. Again, my role with MasterSource in the last 9 years has strictly been that on the creative side. I get my marketing orders from the folks. We do. They'll let me know. The music supervisors over there will let me know what they're getting asked for. They're getting asked for a lot of, Asian pop. By the way, K-pop is like ruling the world now. So that's been a very, very popular style. We've done Asian pop titles now almost every year for the last 3 or 4 years. So we are responding to what the market is telling us. So the folks at FirstCom will give me a list of genres in which they feel that they need more of, or they're getting a lot of requests for, and that helps me determine which titles to produce. So unfortunately, I don't have a stitch of administrative work to do anymore, and I love that.
I bet you do. That would be my dream job at Taxi, is just doing the fun stuff and not doing all the work that nobody ever sees that goes behind it. Let's see. Tony Salazzo asks, have you had feedback that your new songs sound dated? Put another way, how do you keep up with current sounds? Or maybe that's not an issue for you. So I think in general what Tony's asking is, a fair amount of our members are middle-aged, maybe even into their 50s and 60s, and the stuff they tend to make sounds like what they grew up loving, and they get a lot of feedback saying this sounds dated. Sometimes you want stuff that sounds retro and dated.
You're absolutely right. Sometimes I get asked to produce stuff that's dated. We'll do an 80s, an 80s pop title, or we'll do a 90s alt rock title. Now those are dated. Those are specific. Those are specific eras in which certain types of music were prevalent during that era. If I can maybe extrapolate on what Tony's saying, is that what about the sounds? Sometimes sometimes the drum sounds that drummers are using now, that they evolve. Drummers can buy these sounds, these kits essentially. And they change in time, and sometimes even guitar tones change in time. So if we're producing something that's contemporary, yes, we have to make sure that we're not using like an 808 drum machine when we're doing something that's a contemporary a contemporary title, or we're not using a guitar tone that sounds like it was from 1976 Boston, the Boston album, when it's when it's a hard rock title we're doing now. So we have to be we have to be aware that the sonic sounds that we're using to make these recordings are reflective of what we're being asked to do. I think that's the better answer.
How about string libraries and horn libraries in particular? They seem to just keep getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
And sometimes at Taxi, we hear incredibly well composed pieces come in. And then you get into, like 30 seconds in and a string line comes up and you go, oh, I can't believe they're that good as a composer working from a, digital audio workstation at home. Yeah. They've got so much of their act together, and yet they don't realize that these strings sound like they're 10 years old. They just don't sound that convincing. Are dated or crappy sounding strings and horns an issue for you? If you hear a great piece and the strings don't sound good, will you pass on the piece?
Well, for me, I don't produce a lot of orchestral stuff. By the way, MasterSource, when I started MasterSource many years ago, I knew that I couldn't be all things to all people. Okay.
Smart.
And I adopted the Kentucky Fried Chicken concept. Now, what's the Kentucky Fried Chicken concept? Well, Kentucky Fried Chicken, they do chicken right. Okay. That's their tagline. Right? They do chicken right. They're not doing burritos. They're not doing sushi. They're not. Maybe they do salads. No, I don't know. But they do chicken right. Okay. So I came from the pop music world. That was the era that was the arena, the genre that I was most familiar with. To this day, 25 years later, MasterSource has not done a single classical album.
Wow.
Very, very little orchestral music. I had a series called TPM Trailer and Production Music. I only did 3 of those. But in general, I didn't do orchestral music. I wasn't, I wasn't an expert on it. So I stuck to what I knew how to do best, and that was rock music and pop music. So to this day, I really don't produce. I don't get asked to produce the orchestral stuff because I'm admitting I'm not the orchestral guy.
It's okay to be one thing and do it really well. It's smart.
Very, very little world music. If somebody came to me and needed a piece of Swahili dance music, I'd gracefully bow out and say, I'm not your guy, but here's somebody, it's a friend of mine with a library that might have it,
By the way, you just brought up something really interesting. I know library owners. There's a competitive brotherhood out there among library owners, and I've seen that happen where I've had one library call me and say, I just heard something really, really good. It's just not right for my client base. Can you connect me with this other library that I think has a lot of shows that they work with that would probably eat this up? And I thought that was really menschy of him to do. And it's also heartwarming to know that just because you're not right for this catalog, you could be great for another one.
Yeah, I used to refer, I don't know if you know Marty, Source Q, but he's been doing this as long as I have, but he really came from the orchestral world and the classical world. And I used to just I liked him. He was nice to me. I used to refer anything over to him that was, in that field. I'm pretty sure he referred a few things back to me, and I used to get asked for sound effects. I just was not a sound effect library, but I knew several sound effect libraries. I was happy to at least make sure my client got something they needed to have. So,
Pierre Venio is asking a question. What would be an average threshold of published/placed cues or songs before making decent income? What is decent income? But
look, we all know about one-hit wonders. I mean, in the pop world, there are guys that have lived their whole life on writing one-hit song, and that's certainly lightning in a bottle. Okay, but to answer Pierre's question, it's a numbers game. It really is. You can have one piece. I've had several songs that have been licensed dozens of times. And so obviously that writer made some decent money on one song. But in general, it's especially if we're not talking, film and TV placements. We're talking maybe reality, a blanket license in a reality show television. It's instead of picking up $1 off the street, you have to pick up 100 pennies, right? So it's all about volume. That's the way that I looked at it. MasterSource never got those huge sync fees. We never got the $100,000 sync fees, but we probably got $100,000 sync fees.
You probably heard that from the same guy I did, our mutual friend Jim, who once said to me at lunch at Hugo's in Malibu, he said, "Michael, it's a penny business. You just got to make a lot of pennies."
Yeah, well, there's a lot of truth to that. So to answer Pierre's question, I can't say, give you a number. Well, you have to have 10 placements, you have to have 20 placements. But in general, it's all about having as much of your material out there working for you as possible. And by the way, my guys are not beholden just to MasterSource. My guys, I don't sign my guys exclusively to MasterSource. I sign them on a project-by-project basis. I think Matt works for other libraries, and many of the guys that I hire occasionally are working for other libraries too. All about spreading those tentacles.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always tell people you want to be in somewhere around 10 libraries, but choose the 10 wisely, because just getting in a library, although that can be emotionally rewarding, it may be the wrong library for your stuff. You really have to know who you're signing with. Who are their clients? What type of shows? Do they get more stuff in indie films or in episodic TV? Do they play stuff? You wouldn't want to sign a song with a library that 80 or 90% of their income comes from getting instrumental cues in reality shows, because the odds of your thing getting used, not that great. So, it pays to watch TAXITV and learn what we're talking about. Somebody just asked a good question. It's scrolled off the screen here, but it's from a young lady, I believe a young lady, could be an old lady, I don't know. But somebody named Lola asked the question, basically, how long should you wait to hear back from a library? We get this all the time. If there's such a thing as a universal question from our members, it's like, hey, you guys forwarded me to that listing, 3 weeks ago, and I haven't heard anything. Sometimes it could be 6 weeks. Sometimes it could be 6 months. We had one case where somebody got a call back 7 years later. So can you tell them what the average is and why it takes a while for them to hear back from a library?
Well, look, all I can tell you is that when I was on the other end of the telephone making calls to music supervisors and checking in, I try to find a balance of being persistent but not being annoying. Okay. It's a fine line, because you want to stay in front of these folks, music supervisors. A lot of folks reaching out to them multiple times. Music library owners, I can tell you almost on a weekly basis, I'll get somebody hitting my website, asking about opportunities and everything. So I would say, first of all, are we talking about like maybe submitting for a certain TV show that going to edit like today or next month and then air next month? Or we're talking generalities? I would say maybe a month after. I think a month is probably 4 weeks. Somebody hasn't gotten around to listening to your submission. I think maybe at that point in time, it's okay for an email, an email nudge, and a polite one. And I always, if you can make somebody laugh, I think that if you could bring a smile to somebody's face in your email, I think that really helps your cause. If you can word it in a way that you're friendly, or saying, I know you just be light about it in your email and put a smile on somebody's face, I think you're going to get an answer quicker than you would if you didn't put a smile on somebody's face.
Yeah, before COVID, I would always start the email out with, I saw you with your girlfriend in Hollywood at that restaurant last night, but I won't say anything. No, I'm kidding. Of course, I'm kidding. Unfortunately, we had to stop telling members years ago. We used to say your music was forwarded to this company or that company. And then you remember Bonnie Greenberg. I'm sure you remember her, right?
Sure.
Okay. So if memory serves correctly, and I think it does, we forwarded a Taxi member, and this was probably just around the time Google was becoming a real thing. And we said, your music's been forwarded to music supervisor Bonnie Greenberg. Well, some industrious taxi member Googled Bonnie Greenberg, and her home phone number came up. And he called her on a Friday night at like 10 o'clock at home. Is this Bonnie Greenberg? Yes, it is. Who's calling? Well, my name is Bob. You got my song sent to you by taxi. Are you going to use it in your movie? And she goes, what the hell are you doing calling me at home on a Friday night at 10 o'clock? He goes, are you going to use my song in your movie or not? Did you even listen to it? And got really nasty with her. Monday morning, I got a phone call from Bonnie that was, and rightfully so, she was just like, I am never, ever using your service again. So that was the day I made the decision that we can no longer tell our members where they're being forwarded to, because we have a lot of really nice members with level heads and good etiquette, and we have some people that just don't have that together. So they can't follow up. Now, after people hear you say, well, wait a month and then follow up, I'm going to get a flurry of emails from people saying, hey, you forwarded this thing. Can you follow up?
Maybe follow up with you rather than follow up with the client.
Look, we know when they've downloaded the files we've sent them. We check that stuff. Something that happens a lot at Taxi is that the companies run listings when they realize a particular genre is old or out of date, or they don't have enough of something that's become very much in vogue lately. So they call us and say, hey, can you find me a bunch of K-pop stuff? And then we run a listing. We forward them the K-pop stuff because it's the happening thing at the moment. And then none of our members, we tell our members, you've been forwarded to a library for your K-pop thing that you submitted for XYZ listing. The library then doesn't get back to them because that was a general thing. They're looking for more K-pop. All of a sudden, they get a new show that they're working on, and it's fast and furious, and they're getting stuff out because it's episodic, it's weekly, and they get totally distracted. And if they even think about that file of K-pop stuff on their desktop, they're thinking, oh yeah, I got to get to that. And they don't for quite some period of time. And then they get a little lull between Christmas and New Year's. And they go, you know what? I'm going to clean off my desktop. Oh, that K-pop stuff from Taxi. That's the magical day when they hear the great thing in there and they reach out to the members. So again, it might have been Matt Hirt. It was certainly one of our early successful members that came up with write, submit, forget, repeat. It's like wash, rinse, and repeat.
Yeah.
Write, submit, forget, and repeat, because your job is to just keep cranking it out and getting it on as many desktops as you can. And eventually the stuff that's destined to bear fruit will. Just don't worry about it. Is that sound advice?
I think you hit the nail on the head, because the last thing you want to do is to piss off someone who may have used, your song, but you came across so badly that you left a bad taste in their mouth and they just don't want to do business with you. So I think that's sage advice. And I said this earlier. That unfortunately, well, I don't know, unfortunately is the right word, but in the music library world, you have to look at it almost as a commodity, and it doesn't mean that your music has any less value than a piece of pop music. It's just that in this field of music, in this field of the music business, music is somewhat commoditized. And the other thing that you brought up, I used to have in the early days, like when I found a song that I liked and I wanted to sign, and some writers were just so emotionally attached to a piece of music because they wrote it for their dead cat or whatever it was. They didn't want to part with it. You have to put that in the rearview mirror. Somebody once told me production music library is like assembly line music, and I maybe that's too harsh of a term to use, but there's certain aspects of that are correct. That it is somewhat of a job. It is somewhat repetitive, and that you're cranking one song out after the other. And after you make that song, you got to just push it off the assembly line.
Yeah.
You can't have an emotional attachment to it. If you do happen to write that your Stairway to Heaven piece of music, then don't give it to a library. Keep it
right.
Keep it in your files and play it for yourself forever. But you brought up a memory that there were in the early days. There certainly were sometimes I would hear that. Well, this is such a special piece of music. I just can't part with it. Okay.
Right. If you write your grand
write
opus,
piece of music. Yeah, go put that one aside and write me another one just like that.
Apparently, I butchered Lola's question a little bit, but I'm glad we talked about all that anyway because it's important stuff to get out there. Lola's actual question, she typed in the thing again, is when a library reaches out to you and offers you a deal, how long can you go before you get back to them with an answer? If you need time to think about it or consult with an attorney, how long will they think is too long, like you're not interested or you're a jerk?
I don't think there's any real answer to that. I think if you went back to the library and said, I'm super interested in this, I just want to get some opinions or some advice on something, and I'll get back to you in a reasonable period of time. I think, look, if as long as it's going to, I think a month, a couple of weeks, a month is certainly a reasonable period of time, not 7 years later as your client got back to your writers. But look, if a library is pressuring you to make a deal right away, I think that should be a red flag. I think, I respect people. I respect people that do the research and come back with questions or say that, that's my advice to them. My advice to them is to, make sure you understand what you're signing or retain somebody to help you understand it. So I respect that. I'm not going to force somebody to,
you could, if you're the composer, the artist, you could ask the question, hey, is this something that you need me to make a decision on right now because you got a show that needs it this week? Or is this something that's just going in your catalog? And if that's the case, do I have a few weeks to consult my attorney?
Yeah, but if it is something that, has a time sensitive element, like you said, a TV show that's editing like this week, and they need to edit and finalize by the end of the week, then maybe say, I'll get back to you right away. I'll get back to you by tomorrow, 48 hours. I'll get back to you in enough time that you can make a decision or, move on to something else. I'm not going to leave you hanging. That'd be the way to say it, I think.
Believe it or not, our time is up. This went by incredibly fast. I've really, really, really enjoyed having you on the show. I want to plug the book one more time. It's ROCKSTAR 101. Liz, if you could put the link in the chat room again, I'd appreciate that. When are you coming back to town, give or take? Do you know?
Well, I commute. I'm up in Big Bear, California right now. I also have a place very close to you in Agora Hills. So I've been kind of commuting every other week. So I'll probably should be back down the hill next week.
All right. Well, the next time, I was going to say next time you're here, let's go out for lunch, but we can't. I forgot.
Unless it's takeout and we're 6 feet socialized. So
yeah, we can go to a sushi place and sit on a curbstone in the parking lot. Anyway, enjoy the holidays. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to give you a call tomorrow about some business stuff. And man, great having you on. I hope you can come back again because I still have plenty more things I would love to ask you.
Well, let's do part 2.
All right.
We'll make it a trilogy. We'll make it a trilogy. How's that?
Sounds great.
All right.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Marc Ferrari. And I'll see all you guys tomorrow for Taxi's Quarantini Happy Hour, 4 o'clock, right back here. Thanks, Marc. Bye-bye.
All right. You're welcome.